Hello and welcome to our guide for Garrosh Hellscream, the final boss in the Siege of Orgrimmar. This is a 3-phase fight, but there is also a transition phase which occurs more than once. Let's start with phase 1. During this phase, you fight Garrosh and a few types of adds. Garrosh only has 2 abilities in this phase. He regularly creates a desecrated weapon at the location of a random ranged raid member. The weapon is an attackable and killable stationary NPC, and as long as the weapon is alive, there is a damaging void zone centered around it. The size of the void zone is directly proportional to the health of the weapon. The lower the weapon's health, the smaller the void zone will be. Garrosh's other ability is called Hellscream's War Song, which is a buff that Garrosh applies to any adds that are alive, increasing their damage done and health by 150%. Garrosh casts this every 30 seconds. We're now going to look at the adds and what they do before we talk about the strategy for this phase. The first type of adds that Garrosh summons are called Kor'kron Warbringers. They spawn 6 at a time, roughly 40 seconds apart. Their only ability is Hamstring, which deals high physical damage to their target and slows their movement speed by 50%. Garrosh also regularly summons a Farseer Wolf Rider. This lone add has 3 abilities. Ancestral Chain Heal is an interruptible chain heal that the add casts on its allies. Chain Lightning is an interruptible chain lightning used to damage raid members. Ancestral Fury is a stacking buff that increases the Wolf Rider's casting speed by 25% per stack, and a new stack is gained each time the Wolf Rider is interrupted. Finally, 2 objects called Iron Stars are located in the room, one at each end. By default, these objects are inactive, but every 45 seconds, Garrosh will summon a Siege Engineer at each Iron Star. These engineers will try to activate the Iron Star over 15 seconds, and if successful, the Iron Star will catch fire and will roll around half of the room. Any player that comes in contact with an Iron Star is instantly killed, and adds who come in contact with it are damaged and knocked back. It is possible for your raid to prevent one or both Iron Stars from being activated by killing the Siege Engineers. Only ranged raid members can reach them. Whenever a new set of Siege Engineers spawns, any Iron Stars that were used up also respawn. Surprisingly, the strategy for this phase is quite simple. Garrosh should be tanked roughly in front of his throne in the center of the room, and your ranged raid members should stand away from the boss, so that any desecrated weapons do not interfere with the melee group. When desecrated weapons are created, ranged players should DPS and kill them. The Warbringers should mostly be killed through multi-dotting and cleave attacks, although you should focus on them and kill them before a new set spawns, since too many adds coupled with Hellscream's Warsong can overwhelm you. Farseer Wolf Riders are a high priority target, since their heals are very strong. Their Ancestral Chain heals should always be interrupted, but their Chain Lightnings should never be interrupted. This is because you want them to gain as few stacks of Ancestral Fury as possible. Finally, the best way to handle the Iron Stars is to always have one Siege Engineer killed while leaving the other one alive to activate their Iron Star. Then simply move out of the way of the Iron Star and knock any adds that are alive back into its path. This will damage the adds and it will make the DPS check of the phase significantly easier. When Garrosh reaches 10% health, the phase ends and you have about 10 seconds before the transition phase starts. During this time, you should finish off any adds or desecrated weapons. In the transition phase, your raid is sent up into the realm of Isharj for 1 minute. There are 3 versions of this realm, each one being set in a different location in Pandaria, but they are very similar. Your raid will need to kill varying numbers of Shah adds that do not really do anything. All players who are near an add when it dies gain a buff that grants them 50% reduced damage taken for a short while. Killing all the adds will allow you to reach Garrosh. Until your raid engages Garrosh, he will steadily gain energy, which fills up an energy bar that was not used during phase 1. When your raid starts attacking Garrosh, whose health is now once again full and increased, he stops gaining energy. You will have until the 1 minute of transition phase runs out to damage Garrosh, whose only ability here is a lethal frontal cone attack called Annihilate. Garrosh spams this ability, which in addition to dealing frontal damage also deals a moderate amount of damage to all raid members. At the end of the transition phase, you are sent back down into Garrosh's main room where phase 2 starts. Any damage you do to Garrosh in the transition phase is carried over into phase 2. To quickly summarize the transition phase strategy, you should just make your way to Garrosh as quickly as possible and then DPS him while avoiding his frontal cone attack. In phase 2, Garrosh has 4 abilities, and he also uses his energy resource. Specifically, each ability has an empowered version, which Garrosh begins using instead of the regular version when he reaches certain amounts of energy. We're going to look at the abilities before talking about the strategy for the phase. Garrosh retains his Desecrated weapon from phase 1, and at 75 energy he begins using Empowered Desecrate, which makes the Desecrated weapons become unkillable. Whirling Corruption is a whirlwind attack that Garrosh channels for 6 seconds, dealing raid-wide damage every second, with the damage being lower the farther away players are from Garrosh. At 25 energy, Garrosh begins using the empowered version of this spell. This shoots missiles at random raid members, dealing damage to any players in an 8-yard radius and causing an ad called Minion of Yisharj to spawn at the location of the targeted raid member. These ads have no abilities and they just melee players, but when one of them dies, it heals any other nearby minions to full and increases their maximum health and damage by 200%. Touch of Yisharj is a mind control that Garrosh casts on random raid members. While mind controlled, these players attempt to cast Touch of Yisharj on other raid members, which, if successful, also mind controls these players. Mind controlled players can be interrupted and stunned, and the mind control breaks when they reach 20% health. At 50 energy, Garrosh starts using the empowered version of this ability, which causes the mind controlled players to be immune to loss of control effects as well as to have increased health. Garrosh also uses Gripping Despair in this phase. This is a stacking tank dot that requires a tank switch. At 100 energy, Garrosh starts using Empowered Gripping Despair, which causes the dot to deal a burst of damage to the target relative to the number of stacks each time it wears off. Furthermore, it debuffs the target to take additional damage from these bursts in the future. In short, it turns the ability into a soft enrage that will eventually kill your tanks if it goes on for too long. You're probably wondering how Garrosh gains any energy in addition to what he gains in the transition phase before you manage to engage him, and the answer to that is that throughout phase 2, you will occasionally, roughly every 3 minutes or so, be sent into the realm of Yisharj, where the transition phase is essentially replayed. Whenever this happens, you will have to do exactly the same thing you did in the transition phase, namely get to Garrosh as quickly as possible and stay alive while damaging him. So let's look at how to deal with phase 2. The first thing you want to do is use correct positioning. Ranged raid members should stand together away from the boss at the side of the room. Every time a desecrated weapon spawns on them, they should move out of the void zone. We advise you to ignore the weapons, since the size of the room should allow you not to run out of space until the end of the fight. This positioning also ensures that the range group will be reasonably far from Garrosh so as to take less damage from Whirling Corruption. Anytime Touch of Yisharj is cast, the mind-controlled player should be prevented from casting Touch of Yisharj and they should be damaged until their mind control is broken. The phase becomes trickier when Empowered Whirling Corruption and Empowered Touch of Yisharj start being cast. For Empowered Whirling Corruption, your raid should spread out whenever it is about to be cast and the minions of Yisharj should be killed away from other minions. This point is very important because if the minions get a chance to become buffed, they can quickly wipe your raid. Empowered Touch of Yisharj doesn't really change much, and it just means that you need to be very focused on interrupting and breaking out the mind-controlled players quickly, since stunning or fearing them is no longer possible. Depending on your raid's DPS and efficiency during the transition phases, you will probably not get to experience the empowered version of Gripping Despair, but in any case, there is nothing to this except that the tanks need to watch their health each time their stacking dot falls off. In any case, phase 2 is made considerably easier the quicker your raid is to reach Garrosh in each transition phase, since this prevents him from gaining too much energy. When Garrosh reaches 10% health again, he enters phase 3 and heals up to 25% health. During this phase, he uses empowered versions of all 4 abilities from phase 2, as though he had 100 energy. Nothing else is different from phase 2 though, and this is just a quick and intense burn phase. For a more detailed and constantly updated written version of this guide, go to the link in the description. Thank you for watching.